Press TV's news analysis of the latest events that have rocked the Arab world. In this section, we'll be focusing on Libya. The latest news coming out of Libya is that revolutionary forces say they've pushed Gaddafi troops out of the western city of Misrata. The city has been under fire from troops loyal to the defiant leader Muammar Gaddafi. Witnesses say at least 30 people were killed with dozens of others wounded. That's while Italy has decided to increase its air power in NATO-led operations in Libya. A statement from Italian Premier Silvio Berlusconi's office says Rome will allow its air force to bomb selected military targets. Well, this comes a day after NATO warplanes targeted Libya's capital, Tripoli. Meanwhile, earlier, US Senator John McCain called on Washington to recognize the Libyan National Transition Council and arm it. McCain made the remarks during a visit to the city of Benghazi. However, he advised against deploying foreign troops to the North African nation. That's while the chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen, says the US will not arm the revolutionaries fighting regime forces. Well, let's discuss the situation in Libya now with our panel today. We're joined by Chip Pitts, political commentator, joining me on the phone from Dallas. And we've got Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Secretary to US Treasury, joining me via Skype from Panama City. Welcome to the program, gentlemen. I'd like to start with you, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, if I may. Doctor, there is talk about Washington being advised to arm the revolutionaries. Do you think it's a good idea?
They are already arming them. I mean, they are armed. That's what's unique about the Libyan revolt. It's not a peaceful revolt. It's not taking place in the capital. It's an armed revolt from the eastern part of the country. And we know, for example, that the CIA is involved. It's there on the ground. And so they're already armed.
And so how do you compare the military intervention in Libya to the one in Bahrain?
Well, of course, we don't want to overthrow the government in Bahrain or in Saudi Arabia, where both governments are using violence against protesters because they are our puppets, and we have a large naval base in Bahrain. We want to overthrow Gaddafi and Assad in Syria because we want to clear China and Russia out of the Mediterranean. China has massive energy investments in eastern Libya and is relying on Libya, along with Angola and Nigeria, for energy needs. And this is an American effort to deny resources to China, just as Washington and London denied resources to the Japanese in the 1930s. And the interest in the Syria protest, which WikiLeaks shows the Americans are behind. We're interested in that because the Russians have a massive naval base in Syria and gives them a presence in the Mediterranean. And so you see that Washington is all for intervening against Libya and is putting more and more pressure on to intervene in Syria because we want to get rid of the Russians and Chinese, and we don't have anything to say about the Saudis, how they treat protesters, or anything to say about the violence used against protesters in Bahrain.
So you're saying the ultimate goal of attacking Libya is because of the oil factor?
Well, it's not just the oil. I mean, the oil has been there a long time. It's the fact of China's penetration of Africa and China lining up oil supplies for its energy needs. You may be aware that the International Monetary Fund has released a report which says that the age of America is over, that the American economy will be bypassed by China in 5 years. And the United States will then become the second economy rather than the first. So
right.
One of the things that Washington is trying to do is to block, to use its superior military and strategic capabilities at this time to block China's acquisition of resources in order to make the development of the Chinese economy slow down, to reduce the ability of China to acquire what it needs for its development. This is a major reason that the CIA has been active in eastern Libya, and it's the reason the protests broke out in the east, not in the capital, like in the other Arab countries. And it's the reason it's armed. Yes. The protesters is an armed rebellion.
Yes. Now, Mr. Chip Pitts, let's have your opinion. What do you think about the U.S. role in Libya? How do you assess it?
Well, I believe that Dr. Roberts has astutely raised the larger geopolitical issues that are often neglected when looking at this. I don't think that the evidence that this was a strictly humanitarian action was there. In fact, I've actually been very concerned that the U.S. and NATO seems oblivious to the fact that in supposedly trying to stop a humanitarian disaster that was supposedly going to happen in Benghazi, now we're actually seeing in a self-fulfilling prophecy an escalation, a mission creep, a militarization, an intervention in a civil war that's resulting in hundreds of deaths on the ground. And they're deaths that, are not speculative. They're deaths that are actual. Women and children are being killed. And that's, we actually see the possibility of a spreading conflict where we go beyond a civil war to, truly Hobbesian, internecine tribal warfare in an environment like Libya. So once again, it seems to me, and I suspect Dr. Roberts would agree, that in the name of, of humanitarianism, the U.S. is actually undermining its true security interests by increasing instability in the region.
And Mr. Pitts, how much do you think the attack on Libya is because of the isolation of Libya in international diplomacy, the isolation of Gaddafi in particular?
I think that that's actually a hugely significant factor. The fact that Libya was easy to attack is a factor. And the fact, as Dr. Roberts pointed out, that Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, for example, are allies that are standing by. And we stood by Yemen until it became impossible to do so any longer, just as we stood by Mubarak in Egypt until it became evident that he was on the way out. So it makes it easy when you've got someone as somewhat stigmatized and sort of a pariah as Gaddafi was. It's easy to attack. But what happened, in addition to underestimating the actual composition of the rebel forces, not really knowing what their capabilities were, I think that we also in the U.S. underestimated the degree of support that Gaddafi has, both within his country still, but also, in other countries, say in Africa and among the participants of the African Union. And so there really wasn't the sort of, accurate strategic analysis that needed to occur before this action was undertaken.
Dr. Craig Roberts, what do you think? Do you think Libya's diplomatic isolation was the main reason for this military intervention?
No, I don't think it's the main reason. The main reason, I think, was to evict China from Libya, which is what is happening. The Chinese had 30,000 people there, and they had to evacuate 29,000 of them. So it's directed at China. It's also a payback to Gaddafi for refusing to join the United States Africa Command, what they call AFRICOM. It became operative in 2008. It was the American response to China's penetration of Africa. We created a military response to that, and Gaddafi refused to participate. He said it was just an act of imperialism, trying to purchase an entire continent. And I think the third reason is that Gaddafi, or Libya, controls an important part of the Mediterranean coast, as does Syria. And so I think those two countries are just in the way of American hegemony in the Mediterranean. Certainly the Americans don't want a powerful Russian fleet stationed there, and they certainly don't want China drawing energy resources. So I think that's what you see. The Americans, or Washington rather, Washington was caught off guard by the outbreaks of protest in Tunisia and in Egypt, but quickly learned that they could hide behind Arab protests to evict Russia and China without confronting them directly. They wouldn't want a direct confrontation. So they've engineered these protests. We know for a fact that the CIA has been stirring discord in eastern Libya for some time. This is not speculation, it's a known fact. And the release of WikiLeaks cables show that the Americans are involved in stirring up unrest in Syria.
Right.
Now, we didn't stir up the unrest in Egypt or Bahrain or Tunisia or Saudi Arabia. We probably are responsible for the unrest in Yemen because we were using drones and strikes against various tribal elements. So I think that's a big difference. It's the Syrian and Libyan affairs have American hands in them, organizing the demonstrations and protests or providing money and so forth. There are always discontented people that can be bought and purchased and promises given.
Right.